Good morning, everyone. It's April 10th, 2019. I'm Eric. In my last video, I talked in part about some of the things that are leading us to a civil conflict. And another thing we can add into what I said there is the shortage of resources. Many of you probably know that the last, 5-6 years, we've had record levels of every kind of weather you can think of. And as a result, there has been farmlands lost due to flooding. Now, a lot of people think that after the water recedes, you might miss a growing season, but after the water recedes and a season passes, the farmer will be able to just simply start farming again. And it is partially true that he may be able to, but there's something to consider before consuming the food produced on this land. When a flood happens, it brings with it all of the toxins and chemicals, if the flood passes through, say, a storage area for nuclear waste, things like this. Basically, what I'm getting at here is the soil is going to be left with all manner of bad things in it. Lots of petroleum, lots of gasoline and oil. I mean, just think about all of the cars out there that have little oil leaks, and while gas evaporates, oil doesn't. Gas also leaves behind a residue. So we're going to have all kinds of stuff in the soil there in these farmlands, and people are going to eat it, or what they're able to produce, and probably end up very sick as a result. But many of these farmers, they're not going to be able to just bounce back. The food crisis is on us. Hundreds of millions of dollars in crops destroyed. And it's not only crops, but cattle as well. So, another thing that leads to civil conflict is a shortage of resources. With our trade deficit as high it is, with our credit we're so badly in debt that there's no way for the money to ever be paid back. There's not even that much money in circulation. So it's a physical impossibility to pay the money back, right? So a lot of these nations that's been dealing with the United States, trading for dollars, the commodities, things like avocados, soy to some degree, just bananas, and many other crops that we have imported. Those crops are not going to be imported at the level they are now, because we are losing our standing in the world as a nation. I mentioned a few times that it was my opinion eventually some of our European allies would end up turning on us. And this is beginning to take place. So any support from those nations that we could rely on in the past, we will not be able to rely on in the future, if we could at all. I think maybe we could rely on it because of our military and our standing as world reserve currency, but this is going to go away. So, my last video, I talked about how a MAGA hat wearer retaliated against somebody for trying to get their hat. They knocked it on the ground, and he broke out a samurai sword and cut the dude's hand. And this is a small instance of violence. However, it is exactly the thing needed to inspire other Trump hat wearers to do something similar. It could be what they call a contagion. And this is one of the things I said was going to lead us to civil conflict. You add to that the shortage of resources, it's all but inevitable. So, you can expect in the next 3 months a dramatic rise in food prices. And the reason why it hasn't happened yet is because we're eating the last season's crops now. There will be no crops in 3 months. The grain reserves were destroyed. Are you beginning to see the picture of what we have to look forward to? And I don't want to be Mr. Doom and Gloom. I don't. Matter of fact, I have a good news article to share with you when I'm done here. I don't want to be Mr. Doom and Gloom, but the overall picture, if people are being honest with themselves, and a lot of people aren't, and that's why they call people like me fearmongers and conspiracy theorists and all manner of other derogatories. They don't want to be honest with themselves. But if you are being honest with yourself, if you take a look at the economy, if you take a look at the political strife going on, not only at the higher levels, but the street level as well, if you look at the endless wars, if you look at the disasters that's happened in the past few years, where farmlands have been devastated, if you look at the number of natural disasters and their severity, if you look at Fukushima, if you look at the wars, if you look at all this stuff, and that's not to mention the depravity of our politicians, the pedophiles, and so on. What other conclusion can a person come to if they look at all these things and if they're honest with themselves? Apparently, I'm not the only one that's Mr. Doom and Gloom either. Just look at the Deagle forecast. That's a lot of fucking people gone. The numbers by themselves, without the added opinion of the people who put that up on their website. So, you know, there's no other conclusion a person who's being honest with themselves and their loved ones can come to, is things are going to get very, very fucking messy. With every new disaster, with every new attack on a MAGA hat person, and you all know I'm not one of them. You all know I'm not a liberal. You all know I'm not a conservative. And I'm not sticking up for the conservatives either. I'm just calling it how I see it. You have two sides. One side has been participating in violence for what? Since before Donald Trump was elected. The other side has been, for all intents and purposes, the receivers of that violence without any real retaliation. How long is that going to go on before the retaliation begins? It lasted a lot longer than I thought it would. So yeah, you need some weapons. You need some way to filter your water. You need dried goods. I don't recommend canned goods, personally, unless you're going to be able to stay in one place for a long period of time. And if you are a person who has canned goods and you think you're going to bug out with them, try carrying a backpack full of those things. I recommend, if you have a stockpile of canned goods and dried goods as well, that you eat the canned goods first, so you don't have to carry it when the inevitable movement comes. You're going to end up having to leave wherever you're at eventually, whether it's because of a nuclear reactor or just violence, all around violence in the area. You're going to have to leave. And you may not be able to drive. In fact, I would say I would count on not being able to drive. If you have a four-wheeler and you're smart enough to figure out how to turn water into hydrogen and to make that a part of your four-wheeler, then you would be able to operate one of them. And if you have some gas backpiled, then you'll be able to use a quad for a while. But you're not going to be able to drive on the roads. Most of these cities in America are going to be ghost towns. They're going to be empty. I see it. I see it coming. And if any of you are being totally honest with yourself, and if you look at each of the things I just got through naming, none of these things are in a good state. And they get worse by the day. Are you afraid? If you're prepared a little bit, you have a little less to fear. And then you add to all the things I just listed, the potential for a extinction level event, meaning a natural event such as Yellowstone. What other conclusion can a person come to? Just wondering. Oh, let me see. Okay, so I mentioned yesterday that I would cover this, and I forgot about it until I saw it again. So I'm going to go ahead and cover it now. The forgotten 9/11 cover-up, the 5 dancing Israelis. You might recall that we've been talking a lot about false flags lately because we should be expecting one due to the amount of chatter concerning EMP. But you remember all the wars we've been involved in as a nation, with a couple of exceptions, not many, have begun with, at very minimum, a massive deception, and at maximum, a outright participation in a major false flag attack. And 9/11 was no exception to this. We can't let people forget about the dancing Israelis and Saudi Arabia's involvement in 9/11. The wrong people for the past, 17 years or so, 18, have been the wrong, we have been punishing the wrong nations. And the government sycophants, the voters of America, have no problem with this. It's kind of like, there's a serial killer on the loose, right? Which, by the way, at any given time in the United States, there's about 50 of them operating. But I digress. But say you have a serial killer on the loose, right? And you arrest somebody, and it turns out that he's not the serial killer. Does attacking or arresting the wrong serial killer stop or prevent other killings from happening? No. So it doesn't make any sense in the context we've been given for us to have gone to war with any of these nations in the first place. The 17th anniversary of 9/11 has come and gone, but What happened 17 years ago and 1 day ago will never be forgotten by any of us. Oh, it will be. They're doing their best to get the public, in particular, those who question the official narrative, to forget. It may not, however, be remembered as you and I remember it. History has a way of being written or being rewritten right before our eyes. Whatever doesn't fit the establishment narrative soon finds its way to the circular file. 9/11 was no different. Despite Saudi Arabia ending up as the reluctant scapegoat, many of us still remember the story of the dancing Israelis, art students that has long since been washed away. But even if ever there was an obvious government cover-up, this is it. And not to mention the fact that the Saudi princes or Bin Laden's cousin or family member was here, and they let them leave. I forget which it was. It was one of the two. I think it was Bin Laden's cousin or dad or something like that, having to do with their construction company. So they let them leave while our airspace was closed down. A lot of stuff, and you know, conspiracy theorists, because I bring these things up. As if they didn't happen, right? ABC News printed a story in June of 2002 entitled, "Were Israelis Detained on September 11th?" And spies with a question mark. Here's an excerpt from that story. Maria says she saw 3 young men kneeling on the roof of a white van in the parking lot of her apartment building. They seemed to be taking a movie, Maria said. The men were taking video or photos of themselves with the World Trade Center burning in the background, she said. What struck Maria were the expression on the men's faces. They were like happy, you know. They didn't look shocked to me. I thought it was very strange, she said. She found the behavior so suspicious that she wrote down the license plate number of the van and called the police. Before long, the FBI was also on the scene and a statewide bulletin was issued on the van. 5 young men, or 5 young Israeli men, 22 to 27, were arrested and detained for over 60 days. The arresting officer said they saw a lot that aroused their suspicion about the men. One of the passengers had $4,700 in cash hidden in his sock. Well, I don't think that's suspicious. Having bank should not be suspicious. Another was carrying 2 foreign passports. A box cutter was found in the van. But perhaps the biggest surprise for the officers came when the 5 men identified themselves as Israeli citizens. In quotes, "We're not your problem." They are your problem. They are everybody's problem. When the men were transferred to jail, the case was transferred out of the FBI's criminal division and into the Bureau's Foreign Counterintelligence section, which is responsible for espionage cases, ABC News has learned. One reason for the shift, sources told ABC News, was that the FBI believed Urban Moving may have been providing cover for an Israeli intelligence operation. After the 5 men were arrested, the FBI got a warrant and searched Urban Moving's Weehawken, New Jersey offices. So, they ended up being deported, but that deportation was delayed so the FBI and CIA could question them. And what was forgotten to be mentioned was that the moving company the Israelis worked for was reported as having at least one vehicle with a painting of a plane driving into or diving into New York City. Below is believed to be an artist's rendition, but hold on, because I have proof that such a vehicle actually existed. And yes, that is the picture that was widely circulated, even though it's an artist's rendition. Whether this is an artist's rendition or the actual truck does not matter. Below you can listen to police communication from September 11, 2001. They talked about the truck with the mural starts around the 5:15 mark in this video. Okay. And since we're here, we might as well check it out. They said 5:15, right? Maybe. All right.
Operator. Bob, give it up there, plane. That's, I got a message on that plane. It's a big truck, mural painted of an airplane diving into New York City and exploding. I don't know what's in the truck. The truck is in between 6th and 7th on King Street. I said, I'll send the issue in the bomb squad there for Westgate. The bird?
Okay, so according to this chatter, such a truck did exist, and it is thought to look like this. Okay? The plot thickens. On June 22, 2001, Urban Moving Systems received a one-time payment of $498,750 from a federal government assistance program. The government doles out cash to businesses regularly, but when cash is given to a company that hired 9/11 suspects, it is certainly cause for scrutiny. The owner of Urban Moving Systems, Dominique Sutter, fled to Israel before he could be questioned further by the FBI. Now, if the Israelis were not involved with 9/11, why would this dude need to flee? Four of his employees, 4 out of 5, dancing Israelis, would eventually bring a lawsuit against Attorney General John Ashcroft. The dancing Israeli lawsuit was eventually dismissed because the plaintiff's failure to serve the defendants properly as per the rules of the federal court. Your Newswire reports what many have suspected over the last 17 years, that these men were very likely Mossad agents. A group of 5 Mossad agents posing as Israeli tourists were caught red-handed by the FBI celebrating and congratulating themselves on the morning of 9/11 attacks. Okay, so no one, I mean no one, can intelligently argue that the Israelis had no role in 9/11. Just like they cannot intelligently argue Saudi Arabia didn't have their role as well, because that it was shown that the financing came from Saudi Arabia. It was Saudi citizens, for many of them, so-called hijackers, were Saudi citizens. And keep in mind that a few of these guys have actually been found alive and well in other countries. Alright, last one here for this video, and probably for the day. Reckoning with failure in the war on terror. I chose this one because of the previous article I just covered. This is coming from Chris Hedges, and I think this Chris Hedges guy is sort of communist leaning, so perhaps we should take what is written in here with a grain of salt. Meaning he is probably, and I don't know for sure, anti-Trump, so there's probably going to be some bias. I think I lied to you because I forgot about the positive article, although I'll be able to summarize that one pretty quickly. Alright. Donald Trump's ascendancy to the presidency, as Max Blumenthal points out in his insightful book, The Management of Savagery, how America's national security state fueled the rise of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Donald Trump, was made possible not only by massive social inequality and concentration of wealth and political power in the hands of the oligarch elites, but by the national security state's disastrous and prolonged military intervention overseas. And this is, in my previous videos, I talked about how civil war is, among other things, just utter collapse, and civil war is going to be among the things that happens as a result. But this is one of the other things that's pushing us that direction. From the CIA's funneling of over $1 billion to Islamic militants in the 1970s war in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union, to the $1 billion spent on training and equipping the radical jihadists currently fighting in Syria, the United States has repeatedly empowered extremists who have filled the vacuums of failed states it created. The extremists have turned with a vengeance on their sponsors. Washington's fueling of these conflicts was directly responsible for the rise of figures such as Zahari and Osama bin Laden, and ultimately laid the groundwork for the 9/11 attacks. It also spawned the rabid Islamophobia in Europe and the United States that defines Trump's racist worldview and has been successfully used to justify the eradication of basic civil liberties and democratic rights. The groundwork for the 9/11 attacks was laid a long time ago with the creation of the Zionist state of Israel. This was a crime committed by Zionists to meet their end game. Although all the things he mentioned, it did have a large role in everything that's going on now. The misguided interventions by the national security apparatus have resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths, over 5 million desperate refugees fleeing to Europe, the destruction of entire cities, the squandering of some $5 trillion of U.S. taxpayer money, rampant corruption, and criminality. And allow me to point out that less than $1 trillion of that money could have saved a lot of people from being homeless, could have saved a lot of people from being hungry, but instead they choose to squander our money on shit like endless wars. The mandarins of national security, rather than blunt the rise of radical jihadism, have ensured its spread across the globe. The architects of this imperial folly have a symbiotic relationship with those they profess to hate. The two radical extremes, the interventionists in the national security apparatus and the radical jihadists, play off of each other to countenance ever greater acts of savagery. And we will be seeing that very same thing playing out right here on the streets of America, a tit for tat with growing ever greater acts of savagery. The more perfidious the enemy, the more your own extremism is justified. We are locked in a macabre dance with the killers we created and empowered, matching war crimes for war crime, torture for torture, and murder for murder. This unrestrained violence has a dark momentum that escapes management and control. It exacerbates the very insecurity it claims to be attempting to eliminate by constantly creating legions of new enemies. And the state does that very same thing here. They create legions of new enemies. Every time the police kick in somebody's door, flashbang a child, snatch children from people's homes, treat the citizenry with utter savagery, something is going to end up happening. It's the very same thing. Our foreign policy is our domestic policy. Drone strikes take out a few bad guys, to be sure, but they also kill a large number of innocent civilians. A former U.S. chief of mission in Yemen argues, given Yemen's tribal structure, the U.S. generates roughly 40 to 60 new enemies for every Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula operative killed by drones. And again, the same thing happens here on our soil with the citizens of this country. So, now, there's not going to be a good end to any of this. Not at all. I'm going to hit this last paragraph here. It's not the last, but it's going to be last for this article. The Democratic Party signing on to the Forever Crusade by the national security state in the name of humanitarian intervention is as complicit. The Obama administration not only accelerated the sting operations in the United States against supposed terrorists, but in its foreign operations increased the use of militarized drones, sent more troops to Afghanistan, and foolishly toppled the regime of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, creating yet another failed state and safe haven for jihadists. And now our current president is doing much of the same stuff as the last 5 or more. Probably a lot more. So, these, I guess I will leave the links in the description box for these articles, in case you want to read them in full. I stopped doing it because it takes up a chunk of time, and most people don't click on the links in the description box. But I will, in this case, go ahead and put the links in. Now, the good news. Revolutionary bill to reject federal government prohibit vaccines until proven safe and necessary. This bill is coming out of Texas, and occasionally they do something good for the people. I mean, it's only in Texas, but maybe others will follow their example. And that's a good thing. At least somebody is trying to push back against you know, the implementation of mandatory vaccination. Okay, so if you agree with my commentary and you like my videos, please do give me a thumbs up. Please do give me a share. I have a PayPal link in the description box, and the links to these articles will be there along with it. Till next time, kill the state, live free.